Everyone, how are you doing? I kind of believe you. Let's try that again. Hello everyone, how are you doing? Much better. How has the show been? Good, okay. We lost some enthusiasm again, but I'll believe you because I also agree. I think it's been a pretty fantastic show so far. So today we're going to be talking about the MVP guide to Office 365 security, more specifically as it revolves around Exchange Online. My name is Teresa Miller, and I will be taking you on this journey with me today. So my goals for what we're going to cover today revolve around, one, why do we care about email security? The landscape of email has changed so much over the last 20 years from when we were doing Exchange on-prem. Some of that's carried over into Office 365 Exchange Online, but now today the threats are much more significant and email is definitely a big target for that. So we're going to dive into that. Then we're going to spend some time looking at Exchange Online protection as well as advanced threat protection. And the focus I took with this today is when you leave, you're going to know where to find all of these settings between some visual screenshots I've included as well as some recorded demos. Yes, I recorded my demos. I never test the demo gods. So we will work through those. And then, to make sure you have a holistic picture of everything you need to be considering to protect your email, we're also going to talk about some of the advanced detection options and blocking that you should be doing with all three of these, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. Because what I tend to find in enterprises is you don't do them all. So before I move forward, I would like to get a better understanding of everyone I have here today. So who here is practitioner in the Exchange Online space? We'll start there. Okay, and who is more of a leadership role and cares about Office 365 security? Okay, perfect. And then one more question. So who here is not quite done Exchange Online and is looking to do more and understand it more before you deploy it? A few of you. Okay, excellent. All right, so let's talk about why we care about this. What's changed over the last several years, even more than ever? So according to Gartner, email is the primary targeting method for advanced attacks. So we don't want to take that lightly. 1 out of every 412 emails contains a malware attack, according to a study that Symantec did. That's a lot. A lot. 91% of cyber attacks begin with a spear phishing email. Business email compromise scams have cost companies over $2 billion in the last 2 years, according to the FBI. I don't know about your enterprises, and I certainly know about myself. Like, we don't have that kind of money to be losing. And this was even more stunning to me, and I think some of this has to do with maybe we need to create better awareness for our users, but only 3% of them will actually even report a malicious email back to leadership. And I think that is something to be thinking about too. That should change, because especially if something does get through and you never knew about it, you're leaving yourself open to some great vulnerability. So here are a few screenshots of emails that I have taken out of a tenant that I don't have control over these settings on. It's a personal email account. Who here has seen these types of emails? So like a fake Chase email, right? Or, ooh, Amazon, you're about to win something. But some of these, while they look very obvious, right? This one looks very obvious. I think the Chase one did too. But then there may be others that aren't so obvious. Now this one came out of my Office 365 tenant. You'll notice at the top, it does tell me that it appears to look like spam, but at a quick glance, maybe I wouldn't have caught that, or a user wouldn't have caught that, and then next thing you know, they're resetting their password or have just given away their password, which creates some big issues. This next slide, I talk about responsibility breakdown, and this is going to cover between you as the customer and the SaaS provider. And I like to share this because I think there's often misconceptions around who's responsible for what. I think we believe that just because we move to the cloud provider is responsible. And that's true only to a certain point. So you as the customer, you are responsible for your data, period. So, and the one I'm going to call out in this group of risks today is the one that we're really trying to attack head on by preventing this type of information or these attacks into our email. So you're responsible for not only preventing the security issues, but dealing with them if they happen, right? So preventing ransomware from getting into your environment, preventing that phishing from happening, and those viruses. And the only way to do that is with the right protection strategy before it even gets to the user. Now, your SaaS provider, they're going to be fantastic at keeping that platform up and running for you. They're going to make sure your application isn't down, and they're going to help you with disasters. So again, today we're going to focus on the security of this. So now that we understand that it's our job to protect our users from these types of emails, right? Because they're not going to tell us about it. Only 3% of them will, unless we start educating them differently. Where I'm going to go next now is into the more technical space. I promised that you would know where to go, find all of these settings from the Exchange Online Protection to ATP, and a little bit further down we'll get into DMARC. So how are you going to protect your enterprise? You need to know what your options are to begin with. So first of all, with Exchange Online Protection, there's a handful of them. You probably were familiar with some of these even with your on-prem versions of Exchange. They have carried over into Office 365, and you may be using them today. So one is the connection filter. So that's where you're going in and manually setting IP blocking or allows. Now that's kind of a tedious task. So to me, this is always an exception. I don't try to manage my email this way. If this is how you're managing your spam on a regular basis, you definitely want to be looking to some of the other options I talk about today. Setting your SCL rating with mail flow rules. I have found over the years that actually using this sometimes overblocks messages and puts a bunch of stuff in my user's junk mail, even valid stuff. So oftentimes, my recommendation on this one is actually to kind of disable it. But if you've had better luck or want to play around with it, you can set it anywhere from 0 to 9. So 0 being basically no spam filtering using this, and 9 being it's going to put whatever it can in your junk mail. And then there's the anti-spam, and actually I'm going to just bring up the anti-malware filtering as well. A lot of this happens automatically. There are some settings that you can modify, and we'll take a look at those during my demo. And then the outbound spam filtering, you can also put some controls in place, which is nice. So, for example, if a mailbox were taken over, or a machine was taken over, and then it was all of a sudden the Outlook was being used to send a bunch of malicious messages, you could have filtering in place that says, well, if a user sends more than 10 messages in a minute, you know something's up. We're going to shut that mailbox down. So in terms of the Exchange Online Protection and that connection filtering, you're going to go to the Exchange Admin Center Protection and Connection Filtering. Who's this familiar to? Is everybody doing this? For the most part, yes. Okay, perfect. And then just making sure you know where these mail flow rules are in terms of that SCL rating. If you want to bypass it or set it more aggressively, go to the Exchange Admin Center, go to mail flow, and set up a rule that looks like this. So we'll just keep that simple. All right, so in terms of Exchange Online protection, I'm finding more and more that managing this from the Security and Compliance Center is much better. You sometimes even end up with a few more features, but if other components of Office 365 you are using can take advantage of settings in here, you can. So for example, if you look at the middle one, ATP Safe Attachments, it actually says if I'm using Advanced Threat Protection, I can use those settings for SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams as well. So there's advantages to getting used to working here. Anybody working in this area on a regular basis? Some of you, awesome, excellent. So we're going to focus, I promised we would take a closer look at anti-spam and anti-malware. And I did want to make sure we took a close look at this, and this will jump into a demo in just a minute, because I find that these settings are changing all the time. As I was prepping this presentation and I was recording my demos, between last week and this week alone, like all of a sudden all kinds of new stuff popped into my tenant. So I was like, I actually re-recorded things so you'd have the latest information. So let's go ahead and take a really close look at how we set this up. I just don't want you to miss out on any possible settings. All right, so we already talked about the location, right? We're going to go into our admin center, and we're going to go ahead and go into the security and compliance section. From there, it's threat management, and then we'll go down to policy. So taking a look at the anti-spam components here, you'll definitely notice there's quite a bit. So by default, the default spam filter's on, but much of this isn't configured. So what you're going to want to do is pop in and take a close look at this, especially if it's been a while since you've configured it, or maybe you've never configured it, right? So if you take a look, there's a lot of different options for managing spam, phishing, and bulk email. You can add X headers, you can put it in the junk mail, you can quarantine it, which does get held under threat management under review. You can go unquarantine something at any time. You can even automatically delete messages. So all of these different types of message formats will give you some great options. And also the quarantine, you have control over how long you keep that. So make sure you take a look and see how long you're hanging onto that spam, because you may want to keep it longer or shorter period of time. Now, these allow sender lists are a little bit different than the connection policy that we looked at initially. This is where you can go in and put a user email address. So I made up a domain, I think. I guess I didn't go look. There could be an ABC XYZ domain. But anyways, so that's the user that I'm blocking. And we're going to go ahead and allow save the turtles. One of my kids is obsessed with saving the turtles, so I thought that would be kind of fun. The next option is going to allow you to block. So same exact concept as the allow. This is by user, email address. So we're going to block anything that's not Microsoft.com. And we're going to block that not Microsoft.com domain as well. The international spam option is interesting. If you're not a global organization, I think it actually could be quite interesting to potentially disable spam that could be coming in from the various languages as well as countries or regions. So I think that's something interesting. If you are a global company, before you start blocking things, we'll be talking about some reporting later on. You may want to do some research on your environment before you start blocking external languages or companies. And then in terms of the spam properties, you have some really detailed options under here. One specifically, you may want to increase the spam score on image links to remote sites. I think that that would be a valuable potential step to take, right? If there's links in it to remote sites, maybe we don't just go ahead and trust that. And so I just give you a few seconds to take a peek here. And then this one in particular, the most important setting in this list to me, in my experience in managing Exchange, is this first one. Why would we want to accept an empty message, right? We don't want empty email addresses. We don't want empty subjects. We want to definitely block that. We also have the ability to do SPF hard fail, so that's a DNS record for spoofing. You can do that from here, and you can also do that from DNS. I'll be talking about that as we work through the presentation. And then you can also enable the conditional sender ID filtering hard fail. That is going to not only look at your SPF record, but it's going to look at the sender ID for the domain, and if it doesn't align, it's actually going to fail it. And then the final setting on here is the NDR backscatter. Actually just takes things, actually let me pause this for a second. So the NDR backscatter is really great for a lot of your NDR messages that you get tend to be spammy, like they're invalid domains. And without the NDR backscatter turned on, some of those will actually not be marked as spam appropriately. So I actually really like this setting. I think it's very valuable. If you have your SPF record in place like you should, and all these other settings in place, the undeliverable backscatter is a nice feature. And then also nice, you have some options to test some of these things. So you could make some of these setting changes and go ahead and do that during a time maybe when your mail sending window is lower or non-existent. You take a downtime, and you could use the BCC or the header text option for that. So next, I know we looked at the connection filter policy already in that first screenshot. If you did set that, then the IP blocking and ads that you put in place would actually show up here. So just another place to do that if you're going to use this console as your central location. Like many things in the Microsoft suite, you have more than one way to do it. Oh, this safe list is nice. It is not on by default, but Microsoft's been keeping track of various safe senders out in the wild, and if you enable this, it will double check from a spam perspective against that list as well. Again, it's optional, but it's actually a really nice extra way to strengthen and increase your ability to block spam. And then the other thing we're going to talk about here before we move on is the outbound spam filter policy settings. So we do have the ability to send copies of these messages to specific people that might be able to review it, or maybe you want to set up a mailbox that somebody's reviewing on a regular basis. But right here, these recipient limits are really the key, I think, to making sure if there's any kind of compromise, you're shutting it down quickly. So putting external hourly limits on mail sends, internal hourly limits, and daily limits, and then restricting that mailbox can go a long way for shutting things down. I've used it. It works beautifully. And when you're done, it doesn't take much to go ahead and re-enable that mailbox once you've validated everything's okay. So let's go ahead and now quickly take a look at the anti-malware settings. So back in the threat management dashboard, I'm just going to click on anti-malware. And this is actually pretty short and sweet. So if I edit the policy I have in place, I go to settings, I have the ability to send a notification message out to the user. In this case, I typically do not, and you'll see why. I actually, when we get to the advanced threat protection and you understand my stance on it, I choose not to do anything with this. And then in terms of attachment types, I know Outlook does a lot of attachment blocking, but you can take it a step further. You can add or remove from this list and make sure that things are squared away. And then the bottom option on here, this malware 0-hour auto page, is fantastic. I've actually had it kick off in my environment. So a message gets through that has malware in it, but it gets through. And then all of a sudden it'll find it a little bit later and it'll disappear. So it didn't quite get caught during the pre-detection mechanisms, but it did get caught after the fact. So it is nice to help protect you. And again, this is Exchange Online Protection, so you're really getting all these options if you're an E3 license user already, which actually would be a great question for all of you. So those of you that are using Exchange Online, how many are E3? Okay, anyone doing the E5? Okay, very impressive. A little bit more split than I was expecting. I always find that E5 conversation to be one of those tough topics in the enterprise because there is a financial spend that goes with it. But I'm glad to see so many of you are going to be able to take advantage of, if you're not already, some of these advanced threat protection options that are available. So advanced threat protection, I mentioned I would share my stance. The features that I'm going to talk about, I think, are critical to the success of keeping these bad messages with malware, bad attachments, bad links away from your users. And again, that means it's protecting your corporate data, your corporate desktops, your servers, even better than ever. So the anti-phishing. Is anyone here having executives getting emails where they're saying, like, the finance person in the department needs to have them approve a payment for somebody? Yes. Those are so frustrating, aren't they? And in one of the projects that I did in the last couple of years, it was like that was like the one message that was the hardest to get rid of with all of the different pieces to this puzzle I'm sharing with you today. They were the hardest to get rid of. So anti-phishing. So the safe attachments component is also nice. It does some additional scrubbing that you don't get with the traditional Exchange Online protection to make sure that attachments are safe. So I feel very strongly about using this. Same with safe links, and just a couple of slides, I'll actually show you an example of a block message that a user would get if a safe link, if a message was bad as a link was bad as a result of excuse me, I can't talk right now. So basically, let me rephrase what I'm saying, it'll come out better. So essentially, safe links will rewrite the URL. And when you rewrite the URL, the user, if they hit a bad URL, they will get a message that clearly tells them that that was not a good URL. So safe links is invaluable because otherwise you'd have no way of knowing if you're hitting like a link that's going to take you to a malware-infested site. And then the other component that's really important is the spoof intelligence. Now, spoof intelligence, in some ways, mimics some of what we're going to talk about in the SPF, DMARC, DKIM component of this, but it does not replace doing that. I want to call that out, and I will reiterate that when we get there. But it does help with some of those messages we talked about where people are spoofing our CEOs and pretending that they're somebody they're not. So the advanced threat protection options that we're going to talk about today are back in that admin security and compliance threat management policy section of the console. And essentially, more specifically, it's going to be this top level with the phishing, safe attachments, and safe links. And then you might say, well, wait, Teresa, why did you choose anti-spam? That's part of EOP. Well, actually, part of the anti-spam, the Spoof Intelligence, is actually an ATP setting that is kept under the anti-spam. As promised, I wanted you to see the message that a user would get if they clicked on a link that was bad if the URL rewrite was in place. So bad URL, user knows now, and you just prevented a machine from getting infected with something bad. All right, so let's take a closer look at these so you can see what settings you have if you were to move forward. So back in that admin center, security and compliance, sensing a theme, threat management, and policy. So let's go ahead and take a look at the anti-phishing. I had to create an anti-phishing policy, and I went ahead. In this case, I applied it to my Office 365 tenant and my account specifically. You can get more granular and do a whole domain as well. You can also exclude recipients, etc. And then basically, as soon as you enable that policy, then you have the option to change some of these impersonation settings. So this one right here is critical. So you can add up to 60 users that you would not want to be impersonated. So get all your C-levels in here that are getting mail for, or people are asking for money. And maybe it's not just your C-levels. I've seen plenty of traditional users be pested for things even like gift cards. So we definitely want to prevent that type of behavior from happening. So we can also add domains. So easy tick box here, right? I can do all the domains I own, and then I can also include custom domains. And then once that's in place, I have the ability to control what happens with those messages. So I can actually keep them in the mailbox and move them to junk. I can quarantine them. I can delete them. I have lots of control over how this works. The next thing I was going to talk about here is this Mailbox intelligence-based impersonation protection. There's a lot of AI and machine learning that kind of goes into this, but it will actually keep track of and try to do some learning so that you don't actually have impersonation. You have the ability to add trusted senders if you just want to make sure something's 100%, and then you have the option to review those settings and continue. Next, we have the safe attachments. So again, completely invaluable. And very easy. So all I did here is it's going to monitor my attachments for malware. I told it to replace it. I actually want the user to know in my environment, so I'm going to replace it with just something so they know something happened. And then I also had a redirect in place so I could have an admin take a look. And I have it applied to every single domain that I own in my tenant. And you do have some additional conditions and exceptions you could include for various reasons you may have in your environment. Every environment's so different. I've worked in environments where we've had to exclude domains because maybe it's not even a mail-sending domain. Safe links, also relatively easy to set up. And just a simple edit here, I have the ability to manually add URLs. I tend not to unless there's an exception. But the biggest thing was this, use safe links. You do it in Office 365 apps, Office, iOS, and Android. And then there's some additional tracking if you would like. And now we're going to get into that spoof intelligence. So if you go into anti-malware, and you'll notice it's the bottom of this screen. There's show me senders I've already reviewed, and then there's the review, the other option. So with the reviewing, I didn't click on the first one because I knew I didn't have anything in the list, but this one in particular, like I have a ton. Now, one thing I want to call out, you're going to see that actually it's calling out that the authentication failed. Let me back this up so you can see the top here. So it gives me the spoofed user. It gives me the sending infrastructure. It tells me how many messages were sent, the number of complaints, and that the authentication result was failed. That's critical. My domain has SPF, DMARC, and DKIM. So the authentication is failing primarily because I have all three of those in place. Now, if you didn't, then this is going to be so important for you to be deploying. If you are running that E5 license or considering it, you would want this spoof intelligence in place because your authentication result actually may have been success, and it would show you those spoofs that are happening. The other thing that I have control over, I mean, thankfully mine were failing, but what I did off on the right on many of these was switched, are they allowed to spoof? I chose no, right? So just coming through and changing these from yes to no if they're not allowed to send is important. Now, exceptions to that might be, do you have a third-party service sending email on your behalf? Anybody use third-party services to send email? Right, and that's actually going to become even more critical part of our conversation as we get into the DMARC and DKIM component of this, because when you deploy those specifically, you actually could accidentally block some of those. So anyways, that's how the advanced threat protection component works. And let's go ahead and take a closer look at some of the other options that ATP provides. So we have all these great blocking mechanisms, but we may need some additional reporting to help us understand some of what's going on. So there are some additional features in the tool set that help us with that. So the threat trackers specifically will help us understand if there's anything going on maliciously within our tenant, but there's also a report in there that will tell us about things going on out in the wild as well. There's also the Explorer, which is a component of advanced threat investigation. So essentially in the Explorer, you can, again, and I'll show you some of this in just a second, you can choose from a menu. So I might choose Phish, for example, or I might say I want to see all my email. And basically, at the bottom of the screen, you'll be able to see, if you choose a column, you'll be able to see all the messages. So you can get some deeper insights into the mail that's flowing in specific categories or everything in your enterprise. Then there's the attack simulator. Attack simulator is, you can actually use it to create attacks to see how your settings in your environment would respond to it. And I think that's a super important testing tool that you can take advantage of to really know how safe you are, right, from those things in the wild. And then there's also the automated instant response. This is actually pretty neat. So when something, this actually works two ways. So there's a manual option and an automated option. So automatically, I'm going to start with that. You don't have to do anything. If something doesn't seem right, Microsoft is going to analyze a message and potentially then act on it. But if something looks suspicious to you that came through to a mailbox and a user is questioning it, you can come in, it's actually done through Explorer, you can go in and initiate an incident response and do some additional analytics on that particular message to see if there was actually something more concerning going on with it. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at that. So the threat tracker, there's a screenshot here for you to look at, so you can see the drop down, and it gives you some really nice reporting and analytics that you can use to see what might be going on around you in your enterprise or outside, and things you might need to be concerned with. Here's the Explorer. So you have the bar chart, and if I were to click on one of those, then you'd see all the messages below, which I'm going to show you now through automated incident response. So in Explorer, I clicked on one of the bars in the chart, and down below all the messages that sent during that time frame appeared. Essentially, I click on a message, and then I go to Action, and I tell it to investigate. And then it starts a process to do further investigation so I can gain an understanding of the status of the intent of that message. This is what happens when you initiate that, and then this is what it looks like while it's processing it. So it'll tell you what's going on. And then there's the attack simulator. You do need multi-factor for this to work, so that could be an exception, and it does need to, the multi-factor does need to reside within your Office 365 and Azure tenant, so you're not going to be able to use a third-party MFA for this. But it is worthwhile to spend the time figuring out what it will take to do that, so you can simulate these attacks on your environment and see how things go. All right, so advanced detection and blocking with SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. Who here is doing all three? Yay, fantastic. So it's not an easy thing to do, especially with all the hands I saw that went up with third-party people sending messages on their behalf, because DKIM specifically requires a signature not only for your domain, but when you have a third party sending on your behalf, they need to do the signature piece as well. I've had implementations of this become quite extended because we worked with a third party that couldn't even do the DKIM signature, and it actually became a requirement. We actually wouldn't work with a third party mail sender that couldn't do the signatures for us. So I'm going to repeat a couple things here. Why do we care about this advanced detection? So email is a primary targeting method, right? We talked about this, but I really want that to resonate with you. Email is one of the top targets. Same with that financial cost with the FBI, the $2 billion on email compromise scams, that's insane. We just don't have that kind of money to lose as enterprises. These C-suite executives. So one of the projects that I did, the Spoof Intelligence piece of this was not where it is today. Again, Spoof Intelligence is not a replacement for doing these things, but the only way we could get rid of those spoofed messages was implementing those three. Now, again, today, I think you'd have great success with those spoofed messages with your C-levels, with the Spoof Intelligence, but this is another reason here. And what about brand protection? If companies can send messages that look like they're from you, that impacts your brand and how your corporation looks to the outside. When you implement SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, you can actually stop messages that you can't even see or track unless you have the right DMARC reporting product to help you with it. So it actually can support brand protection. And I'm sure many of you work for even publicly traded companies, and even if they're not publicly traded, you care about your reputation. You don't want somebody sending something out that says it's from you. So how do we do this? So some of you already know, right? So you implement your SPF record. That is a requirement by Microsoft when you deploy your Exchange Online tenant. You're going to get that DKIM signature in place. Keep that in mind. It's like signing a check, proving that it's your email. You're going to do that. And this particular image is actually, it's from a Microsoft article. The reason you don't want to stop and fall short on getting this implemented is there can be false positives. So if you look, we have a message sent from Contoso over to Woodgrove Bank. It passes fine SPF and DKIM. But as soon as a message gets forwarded, some of those attributes get stripped. And so if, in this case, DKIM hadn't been in place, the message might have been identified as spam. It could have potentially not even made it to the recipient because SPF failed and only DKIM passed. The resource at the bottom of the screen is an article that's worth checking out. It does dive into some of this in a much deeper way. For those of you that love analyzing message headers, who's a message header analyzer? We love our message headers, right? So you can do your own testing, or you can start looking at message headers from other companies in messages you're receiving from the outside. There's an authentication results component in here, and this specifically, in this test, shows that the third-party domain is passing on both DKIM and SPF. Now, why do I need DMARC? So anybody here have just SPF and DKIM, but not DMARC? So you're kind of the way there. And some of that's that struggle, I'm sure, with the DKIM signatures on the third parties. Well, the reason you want to keep going and get that DMARC pass, the DMARC in place is when you have DMARC, it'll check SPF or DKIM, but it will also check the from address to make sure that aligns as well. So you're getting really great verification of how clean that message is. Is it valid? So this takes that a step further, and then this is a message header that shows DMARC passed. So as we're winding down here, I'm going to go ahead and show you. In my case here, I use HostGator for my external DNS. I suspect most of you have something that you're using for external DNS. It could even be Azure. But basically, toward the bottom of the screen here, you're going to see my mouse point over the SPF record. I have mine on hard fail, so that will block anything that is trying to spoof me from that perspective. It's why the Spoof Intelligence had all the authentication failures, at least part of it. Then I have my 2 DKIM selectors that are a requirement to be in place for this to function. And then we're going to follow my mouse pointer up here in just a second, maybe about 5 records up. You'll see my DMARC is also set to reject. So I have some pretty good spoof protection in place just because I have all of these. So next, I'm actually going to have, we're going to take a look at a Microsoft article. If you don't have DKIM in place, there are some great steps in here that you should reference. So take a note of this article name. It's going to make sure that you get DKIM set up correctly in your environment. And you're going to see I have like the steps. It's going to talk about the selectors. It's going to talk about the keys that you need. It's really important to follow all of these steps. And then in the interest of time, I'm going to jump just ahead. 1 second. Because then you also need to go into Office 365, and I'm actually in the Exchange Admin Center here, and I go to DKIM, and what you need to do is for each of your domains on the right-hand side, you would need to enable, which I've already done, which is why they say disable, and then you also have the ability to do a DKIM key rotation. Again, just these malicious messages are getting more and they're getting more difficult to stop. And then one more quick thing on this piece. Double check that all your records work through MX Toolbox or something similar, because you don't want to just put these in and then assume that they're working. They may not be. Quick couple more things. So I promised we would talk a little bit about some of the reporting. Make sure you're using your Office 365 Security and Compliance dashboard to take a look at some of the threats, and also make sure you get a great third-party tool for DMARC reporting. Some companies will even work with you on those complicated DKIM signature components, because DMARC and DKIM and SPF go hand in hand. And so like this is an example of a third-party tool. So here's your checklist. Here are your takeaways. When you're thinking about how to protect your email, you want an end-to-end solution. You really need to be implementing everything we talked about here today, or you're never going to get on the other side of all of the spam and malicious messages that are coming to you. So go beyond the basic Exchange Online protection. Make sure you have attachment checking. Get that URL rewrite in place. That's the safe links. Make sure you're implementing SPF, DKIM, and DMARC completely. Get that process finished. Use those Office 365 reporting tools and get yourself a great DMARC assessment tool. So the key to success is to start before you're ready. So you have a project to work on when you get back to the office. Thank you so much for your time today.